Hey everyone, welcome to another deep dive with us.
Yeah, welcome back.
And today we're going to be tackling excerpts from the Startup Checklist.
Oh, yeah, this is a good one.
It's really for anyone who's kind of in that position of I'm ready to launch a company, I've got this idea, but sort of like where do I go from here?
Yeah, like where do you even begin, right? There's so much information out there.
Yeah, and this book is a really great blend of like practical advice, like real how-to stuff, but also kind of like behind the scenes insights into what investors are looking for, what to expect, the mistakes people make.
Yeah, I think my favorite part of the book is it doesn't sugarcoat anything. It's very straightforward about like the realities of starting a business.
And one of the things that really surprised me is that like saying you have NO competition is actually a red flag for investors.
Oh, yeah, that's huge.
I always thought that meant you were in the clear, you know. No one else is doing this.
Right, like you've cornered the market.
Yeah, exactly.
But actually it kind of shows that you don't really understand the market.
Yeah, or that maybe there isn't really a market.
Exactly. If no one else is doing it, there might be a reason why.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's all about showing that you've done your research and you understand the landscape.
Yep, and that you're aware of like the potential challenges and all that.
So the book kind of kicks off by talking about the entrepreneur themselves.
Okay.
Like it's not just about the idea, it's about the person who's actually going to drive it forward.
Right, the person behind the idea.
They even compare the key roles in a startup to a four-legged stool. So you've got the tech side, the operations, sales, and then the entrepreneur is that fourth leg holding it all together.
I love that analogy. It really shows how crucial the entrepreneur is to the whole thing falling apart.
Yeah. And when they talk about the qualities of an entrepreneur,
Yeah.
of course, there's the vision, the passion, the leadership, all that good stuff. But then they also talk about something that's really interesting.
Okay, what's that?
It's a willingness to take risks.
Yeah, you got to be comfortable with a certain level of risk.
And they don't sugarcoat it either. There's this quote that really stood out to me. It says, "You feel guilty when you're doing something you like doing outside of the company."
Oh, wow. Yeah, I mean, that speaks to the level of dedication that's required.
It's intense.
Yeah.
But it also makes me wonder about burnout.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, how do you maintain that level of focus without burning yourself out?
That's why it's so important to build a support system early on.
Yeah, have people you can rely on who understand what you're going through.
Mentors, friends, family who get it.
So true. And speaking of support, the book then dives into building your founding dream team.
Ah, yes. Finding the right people to be in the trenches with you.
And they acknowledge this kind of tension. You need a really strong team.
Mm.
But startups also change so rapidly.
Yeah.
So how do you balance those two things?
It's tough. You need people who are reliable, but also adaptable.
Like, how do you even know who the right people are when you're just starting out?
Well, the book's advice is to be really clear about commitments up front,
Okay, so everyone knows what they're signing up for.
but also retain some flexibility as things inevitably evolve.
Right, because things are going to change.
Guaranteed.
Yeah.
And then comes the dreaded equity allocation.
Oh, yeah. That's always a tricky one.
Splitting up ownership of the company, who gets what percentage. That's where things can get messy.
Yeah, it's a minefield for so many startups.
And you know what surprised me? The book says splitting equity equally is almost always the wrong approach.
Wait, really? Why is that?
Yeah.
I always thought 50-50 or, whatever the split is amongst the founders, that seemed like the fairest way to go.
It seems fair on the surface, right? But the book argues that equity should actually reflect each person's contribution to the company's future success.
Oh, okay, so it's not just about who came up with the initial idea.
Right. It's about who's bringing what to the table.
So like industry experience.
Yeah. Sweat equity, connections, even personal investments.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I guess it's about recognizing that everyone brings something unique and valuable.
Exactly. And the equity split should reflect that.
And this becomes even more important when you start bringing investors into the mix.
Absolutely. Because now you're not just dividing up ownership amongst the founders, you're sharing it with people who are putting in capital.
Right, and that's a whole other level of complexity.
And this is where understanding the difference between ownership and control is so crucial.
Okay, break that down for me. What do you mean by that?
You could own the majority of the company on paper,
Okay.
but still have limited control over key decisions,
Wait, really? How does that happen?
especially if investors have certain provisions in place.
Now, that sounds a little scary, losing control of the company you built.
I know it can seem that way, but it's actually pretty standard practice.
Oh.
These are called negative control provisions.
Negative control provisions.
Yeah, and they basically give investors veto power over certain decisions, even if they don't have majority ownership.
So it's like a safety net for them.
Exactly. It
Yeah.
protects their investment.
So I guess it's about finding a balance between maintaining control and also attracting the right investors.
Exactly. And the book does a great job of explaining how to navigate those waters.
Okay, so it's not just about percentages on paper. It's about understanding the nuances of those agreements.
And remembering that it's often better to have a smaller piece of a highly valuable company than a larger piece of one that never takes off.
So aiming for that massive growth potential from the get-go.
Exactly. But how do you know if your idea even has that potential?
That's a good question. Not every good idea is a billion-dollar idea, right?
That's where the book's criteria for evaluating business ideas comes in. Even great ideas might not be suitable for the kind of high-growth startup investors are looking for.
Okay, so what are we talking about here? Like, what kind of ideas wouldn't work?
Well, they use some interesting examples. They say you're probably not going to build a billion-dollar company around a Death Star
Okay, a Death Star. That's a bit out there.
or a barbershop or xylophone master classes
Okay, I see where you're going with this. Why wouldn't those work as high-growth startups?
because they lack scalability. A scalable business idea is one that can grow rapidly without hitting major roadblocks.
So it's not just about having a good idea, it's about having an idea that can potentially reach a huge market.
Exactly. And when it comes to planning, the book challenges a common assumption. They say formal business plans are outdated. What you really need is a lean business plan.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What exactly is a lean business plan? Like, is it just scribbles on a napkin?
Not quite. It's a living document, something you constantly refer to and update. They describe it as a roadmap, not a static document you create once and then forget about.
So it's more agile, more adaptable to the changing nature of a startup.
Exactly. They even use a pyramid analogy. Strategies at the top, tactics in the middle, and specific milestones at the base.
Okay, that makes sense. You're constantly adjusting your course based on what you're learning and the progress you're making.
And speaking of staying ahead of the curve, the book then stresses the importance of competitor research,
Even for brand new startups.
especially for brand new startups.
Okay, so this goes back to that point about having no competitors being a red flag, right? It seems counterintuitive, but I'm starting to understand why it matters.
It shows investors that you understand the market. Saying you have no competition often signals a lack of research. Or even worse, a belief that your idea is so unique that no one else has thought of it.
Which investors see as a major risk.
Exactly.
So how do you go about actually visualizing the competitive landscape? I imagine it gets pretty overwhelming trying to keep track of everyone.
The book offers some really handy tools for that. They talk about competitive grids, where you rank competitors on key factors.
Oh, like a side-by-side comparison.
Exactly. It's like stepping into your customer's shoes and seeing how your product stacks up. Then there are quadrant charts, which help you visualize your strengths and weaknesses compared to the competition.
I love those visual tools.
Yeah.
It's so much easier to understand a complex market when you can see it laid out like that. Are there any other ways to keep tabs on the competition?
They even mention professional services that track things like competitor email campaigns.
Wait, really? Like having your own team of spies?
It's like having your own team of spies. You can see what your competitors are saying directly to potential customers, what kind of offers they're making.
Okay, that's next level. I can see how that would be valuable intel. But let's be real. None of this matters if you don't have the money to get your startup off the ground right.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the ever-important topic of funding. The Startup Checklist does a great job of walking us through the evolution of funding options.
Yeah, it's a whole different world than it used to be, right?
Oh, yeah. Back in the day, your options were pretty limited. You basically had to hit up friends and family or hope to find a rare angel investor.
But things have changed a lot, haven't they?
Dramatically. And the book highlights this turning point, the impact of the 2012 JOBS Act.
Okay, for those of us who aren't finance experts, what exactly is the JOBS Act? And why was it such a big deal for startups?
In simple terms, the JOBS Act allowed startups to publicly solicit funding online. Before that, it was a much more restricted process.
So it opened up funding to a much wider pool of people.
Exactly. And this is where platforms like Kickstarter and Indiegogo come in. They allow anyone to invest, even with small amounts of money.
So it's not just about big money investors anymore. It's about tapping into a wider pool of people who are excited about your idea.
Exactly. But it's not just about crowdfunding. The book also breaks down other types of funding you'll likely encounter. starting with convertible notes, which are kind of like loans that convert to equity in the company later on.
So it's a way to get funding quickly without setting a valuation for the company right away.
You got it. They're popular with early-stage startups because they involve less paperwork and can be faster to execute. Then you've got the more formal seed and Series A rounds. This is where professional investors come in and you agree on a valuation for your company up front.
So convertible notes are like dipping your toes in the water, and then seed and Series A rounds are for when you're ready to dive in head first.
Perfect analogy. And then there are government grants, which can be a fantastic option.
I was going to ask about those. Free money, right?
Well, not exactly free. They're highly competitive and usually come with specific requirements.
So they're not for every company, but definitely worth exploring if your startup fits the criteria. But let's talk about the big one. Venture capital. Is that still the ultimate goal for startups?
The book offers a dose of reality when it comes to VC funding. They emphasize that it's incredibly difficult to secure, especially for early-stage startups without a proven track record.
Oh, that's a bit of a bummer. I always thought venture capital was the holy grail for startups.
It can be, but it's not the only path to success. And the startup checklist outlines a whole range of alternative funding options. You've got crowdfunding platforms, angel groups, and even micro VCs or seed funds that specialize in early-stage investments.
So there are options out there, even if the traditional VC route isn't a fit. But regardless of where the funding comes from, I imagine the process of actually raising capital is pretty intense.
Oh yeah, buckle up. It can definitely be a wild ride.
What kind of advice does the book offer to help navigate that process?
They talk about the importance of due diligence, where investors scrutinize every aspect of your business.
It's like being under a microscope.
Exactly. They'll want to see your financials, your team, your product, your market analysis. They leave no stone unturned.
Any tips for surviving that process?
The book actually includes a sample due diligence request list in the appendix.
Oh, that's helpful. Kind of like a sneak peek into what investors are looking for.
It's worth reviewing even before you start fundraising, just to get a sense of what they're going to be asking and how you can prepare.
Preparation is key. So let's say you've made it through the gauntlet of due diligence and you have multiple investors who are interested. Is it as simple as just taking the first offer that comes along?
Not so fast. The book emphasizes the importance of smart money versus dumb money.
Okay, hold on. Isn't all money good money when you're starting a company?
It's tempting to think that way, but
Mhm.
smart money comes from investors who bring more than just capital.
So what else are they bringing to the table?
Experience, connections, a genuine commitment to helping your company succeed. They're not just writing a check and walking away. They're invested in your success.
So it's about finding investors who are truly aligned with your vision.
Exactly. Choosing the right investors can be just as important as choosing the right co-founders. They can make or break your company. And speaking of long-term thinking, the book wraps up this section with a topic that might feel a bit premature when you're just starting out: exit strategies.
I know, right? It's kind of strange to think about selling your company before you've even launched it.
I get it. But the book argues that having a clear exit strategy in mind from the start is crucial, both for you and for potential investors.
So it's not just about building a cool company. It's about building a company that has a clear path to a successful outcome, whether that's an IPO or an acquisition.
Exactly. And that brings us to the end of part 1.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive into the startup checklist.
Yeah, we're ready to keep rolling.
So much good stuff in that first part. But now let's get into like the nitty-gritty of actually launching this thing.
All right, let's make it happen.
So the book kind of jumps right into the legal stuff.
Yeah?
There's a whole chapter called Incorporate Your Company for Protection and Investment.
Yeah. You got to make it official.
It can be kind of daunting though, right? All those legal terms and paperwork.
It's definitely a necessary evil.
Does it really matter how you structure your company in the beginning? Can't you just figure that out later?
Well, the book really stresses that getting it right from the start is important.
Okay, why is that?
Well, they break down the different options, sole proprietorships, partnerships, LLCs, and then the one that most startups go for, C corporations.
Okay, remind me again why a C Corp is the preferred structure.
A few reasons. First off, it offers limited liability, which means your personal assets are protected if the business goes south.
Ah, okay, so it's a layer of protection.
Exactly. And it's also the structure that investors are most comfortable with.
So it's about protecting yourself and also making your company more attractive to potential investors down the road.
Exactly. You want to be set up for success from day one.
But do you really need to hire a lawyer for all this? I'm trying to keep costs down in the beginning.
I hear ya, but the book actually has a whole chapter dedicated to finding the right lawyer.
Oh, wow. Okay. They must really believe in it then.
They argue that a good startup attorney is worth their weight in gold.
So it's not just about any lawyer. It's about finding someone who understands the unique challenges that startups face.
Exactly, someone who speaks your language.
Someone who's been there, done that.
Yeah, they can help you navigate all the legal complexities and make sure you're set up for success.
Like what kind of things specifically?
Oh, incorporating setting up your stock option plan, drafting contracts, all that fun stuff.
The stuff that makes my head spin.
Exactly. That's why you need a good lawyer, so you can focus on the big picture.
Okay, I'm starting to see the value here. It's about peace of mind, knowing that everything is being handled correctly.
Exactly. It frees you up to do what you do best.
But what about the financial side of things? I'm more of a
Oh.
big ideas person, not a numbers cruncher.
Well, that's where a good accountant comes in.
Okay.
The book suggests thinking of your accountant almost like a co-founder.
Wow. I wouldn't have thought of it like that.
Someone who's with you from the beginning, helping you make smart financial decisions.
I always thought accountants were more for like established businesses, not brand new startups.
It's a common misconception, but the book argues that understanding your finances is crucial from day one.
Makes sense, the sooner the better.
Exactly. A good accountant can help you set up your books, forecast cash flow, make sure you're using your resources wisely.
So it's not just about number crunching. It's about having someone who can translate those numbers into actionable insights.
Exactly. They can help you see the story behind the numbers.
Okay, so I've got my legal and financial dream team in place. What's next?
Now it's time to start building your brand.
Okay.
The book has a chapter called Establish Your Brand with Online Public Profiles.
Oh yeah, that's got to be important these days.
Absolutely. It's your digital storefront.
I was thinking that would be pretty straightforward.
Mm-hmm.
Set up some social media accounts, call it a day.
It sounds simple, but the book goes much deeper than that.
Okay, how so?
It's not just about creating profiles. It's about crafting a consistent brand identity across all platforms.
So like having a cohesive look and feel.
Exactly. And creating content that resonates with your target audience.
Right. You got to know who you're talking to.
And they even talk about using your online profiles to attract investors.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just for customers, it's for potential funders too.
Exactly. You never know who's watching.
Okay, so it's about thinking strategically about your online presence, not just treating it as an afterthought.
Exactly. You want to put your best foot forward digitally.
But with so many platforms out there, where do you even begin?
Well, the book highlights a few key ones, starting with Crunchbase.
Crunchbase.
Yeah, it's basically a directory for startups. A great place to create a profile, showcase your team, track your funding rounds.
So it's like a virtual resume for your company.
Exactly. A one-stop shop for investors and potential partners to learn about you.
What other platforms do they recommend?
They talk about Glassdoor, which is focused on company culture and employee reviews.
Oh, interesting.
It might seem early to be thinking about that, but potential employees are already checking you out.
Yeah, that's true, especially in today's competitive job market.
We want to build a positive company culture from the get-go.
Attract and retain top talent.
Exactly. And then there's the big one, Facebook.
Can't forget about Facebook.
It's still the king of social media, and they recommend using it to connect with customers and build a community around your brand.
Yeah, Facebook is all about engagement, sharing updates, building relationships.
Exactly. And what about Twitter? Are you on Twitter?
Oh yeah, we're tweeting up a storm.
They're right there with you.
Yeah.
They see Twitter as a powerful tool for sharing news and updates in real time.
Yeah, and engaging in conversations about your industry.
It's like a virtual water cooler for the startup world.
You can connect with investors, journalists, other founders. It's a great way to stay on top of trends.
Exactly. And even though it might seem like an old school platform, they also make a strong case for LinkedIn.
Really, LinkedIn. I thought that was more for like established businesses, not so much for startups.
They argue that it's a more professional environment than Facebook ideal for showcasing your team's expertise, telling your company's story, and building credibility in your industry.
So it's a place to position yourself as a thought leader and attract potential investors or partners who are looking for serious businesses.
Exactly. And for startups specifically looking to raise funding, they recommend checking out platforms like Gust and AngelList.
Oh yeah, I've heard of those. Those are the platforms where you create detailed profiles and essentially pitch your company to potential investors.
Exactly. It's like a virtual dating site for startups and investors.
I love that analogy.
And the book provides some great tips on creating a compelling profile and managing those investor relationships.
Okay, so it's about putting your best foot forward and showcasing what makes your company unique and investable.
Exactly. And they also dedicate a whole chapter to the importance of networking in the startup world.
Networking. Uh, I have to admit that word makes me cringe a little.
I know it can be intimidating, but trust me, it's crucial.
Is it really that important? Can't I just focus on building the great product?
The book argues that building relationships is essential, especially in the early stages.
Okay, so it's about more than just the product. It's about the people you know and the connections you make.
Exactly. It's about getting out there, attending industry events, connecting with other founders, mentors, building a support system.
So you're not alone in this journey.
Absolutely. There's a whole community of entrepreneurs out there who are facing similar challenges and can offer valuable advice and support.
I guess it's like what you say, it takes a village.
Exactly. You don't have to do it all alone.
Okay, so we've talked about building a team, setting up the legal and financial foundations, establishing a strong brand presence, and networking like crazy. Now it's time to actually build a product.
All right, let's get our hands dirty.
This is where things get real.
The book introduces this concept of the minimum viable product, or MVP.
MVP, I've heard of that.
It's all about getting something out there, quickly testing it, and iterating based on feedback.
So you're not trying to build a perfect product right out of the gate.
Exactly. It's about getting a basic version into the hands of real users as soon as possible.
Why is that so important?
It's about validating your idea, learning what works and what doesn't, and avoiding spending months or even years building something that nobody wants.
Oh, that makes me feel so much better. I always thought you had to have a fully polished product before you could even think about launching.
Nope. The MVP approach is all about speed and agility.
So what does an MVP look like?
It can be a simple landing page, a basic prototype, or even a service that simulates your product's functionality.
The key is to get feedback early and often.
Exactly. You want to learn as you go.
And once you've launched your MVP, how do you know if it's actually working?
That's where data comes in. The Startup Checklist has a whole chapter on measuring your business with data analytics.
Okay, I have to be honest, data analytics sounds a little intimidating. I'm more of a creative person, not a numbers geek.
I hear ya, but the book breaks it down really well.
Okay, guys.
They explain the different types of data you should be tracking, like website traffic conversion rates, customer acquisition costs,
Okay.
and they offer practical tips on using tools like Google Analytics, which is free.
Oh, that's helpful.
It's surprisingly powerful.
So it's like having a dashboard for your business, showing you all the vital signs and helping you spot trends.
Exactly. And the key is to use this data to make improvements.
Right, so it's not just about collecting data, it's about actually doing something with it.
They talk about the PRR cycle plan, run, review, revise.
PRRR, I like it.
It's about constantly experimenting, analyzing the data, and making adjustments based on what you learn.
So you're always iterating, always improving.
Exactly. It's not about sticking to a rigid plan, but about being willing to pivot based on what the data tells you.
I love that it's about being flexible and adaptable.
And that brings us to the really exciting part, growing your startup.
Yes, let's talk growth, because that's what it's all about, right?
Yeah.
Taking your startup from a small seed to a thriving business.
That's the dream. And the book offers a bunch of strategies for achieving that growth.
Lay it on me.
It all starts with understanding your ideal customer. Who are they? What are their needs? Where do they hang out online?
Okay, so you got to really know your audience.
Exactly. Once you know who you're targeting, you can start building a sales funnel that guides them towards making a purchase.
So it's not just about building a great product, it's about getting it in front of the right people.
And making it easy for them to buy.
They talk about choosing the right traction channels for your business.
Traction channels.
Yeah, those are basically the different ways you reach your customers, right? Things like social media, email marketing, content marketing.
You got it. And different channels will be more effective for different businesses.
Right, it's about figuring out what works for you.
Exactly. It's about experimenting, testing different approaches, and figuring out what resonates with your specific target audience.
So there's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Nope. You got to find what works for you.
And they even delve into more advanced growth strategies like partnerships, joint ventures, even acquisitions.
Oh, yeah. They're thinking big picture.
It's not just about organic growth. It's about exploring all the different avenues for expanding your reach and scaling your business.
And they offer tons of real-world examples of companies that have successfully implemented these strategies.
Oh, that's helpful to see how it's actually done.
From small startups to global giants.
Wow, that's inspiring.
It shows what's possible when you combine a great product with smart growth strategies.
This has been so helpful. It's like a masterclass in startup growth, packed with practical advice and inspiring examples.
I'm glad you're getting so much out of it.
I feel like I'm finally getting a handle on this whole startup thing.
That's awesome to hear.
But we're not done yet.
Oh no, there's more.
We'll be back for the final part of our deep dive, where we'll tackle the really juicy stuff, funding valuation and exit strategies.
All right, buckle up. It's going to get good.
That's where the real game begins. All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the startup checklist.
The grand finale.
We've covered a ton of ground already, but now it's time to tackle the big three, funding, valuation, and exit strategies.
The stuff that keeps founders up at night.
Exactly, the things that can make or break a startup.
No pressure, right?
So let's start with funding. We talked about the different types of funding in the previous parts, but this book actually walks us through the process of actually securing that funding.
Ah, yes. The art of the ask.
It feels like a whole other beast.
It definitely is. It's more than just saying, hey, can I have some money?
Right, like what does that process actually look like?
Well, the book breaks it down into a few key steps: developing a killer pitch, building a solid financial model, and then creating a pipeline of potential investors.
So you're not just pitching your product to customers, you're also pitching your company to investors.
Exactly. It's a whole other sales process.
Okay, and just like with customers, you need to understand your audience, right? What are investors looking for? What are their motivations?
You got to speak their language.
But how do you even find these investors in the first place? Where do you start?
Well, the book really emphasizes the power of networking.
Networking again.
It's all about who you know.
So get out there,
Yep.
attend industry events, connect with other founders.
Exactly. And remember those online platforms we talked about earlier, like Gust and AngelList?
Oh, right. Those are like virtual matchmaking sites for startups and investors.
Exactly. And they can be really valuable resources for connecting with the right people.
Okay, so it's about building those relationships, getting your name out there.
It's not about sending out a bunch of cold emails.
Right. You want to have that personal connection.
And the book talks about the importance of warm introductions.
Warm introductions.
Yeah, having a mutual connection who can vouch for you and make that initial introduction.
So it's all about building trust and credibility.
Exactly. Investors are much more likely to take a meeting if you come recommended by someone they trust.
So you've networked your way into a meeting.
Mm.
You've got investors interested. What happens next?
That's when you start talking about the terms of the investment, and that's where a term sheet comes
A
in.
term sheet.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, break that down for me.
It's basically a document that outlines the key terms of the investment.
Okay.
Think of it like a blueprint for the deal.
Yep.
It covers things like the valuation of your company, how much equity the investor will receive, their rights and protections, your obligations as a founder.
So it's like a prenup for your startup and its investors.
Exactly. It lays out all the ground rules and makes sure everyone's on the same page before things get serious.
And the book actually provides a sample term sheet.
Yeah, in the appendix, so you can see what one actually looks like.
Oh, that's super helpful.
But remember, this is where having a good lawyer is crucial.
Right, because it's all legalese and financial jargon. You need someone who can translate it all into plain English.
Exactly, and make sure you're getting a fair deal.
The book also talks about the importance of understanding the investor's perspective.
Right. It's not about viewing them as adversaries.
It's a partnership.
Exactly. You want to find a win-win scenario that benefits everyone.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you've negotiated the terms. The next big hurdle is figuring out what your company's actually worth.
Yes. Valuation, the million-dollar question.
I have to admit, valuation sounds like a total mystery to me.
Hmm.
How do you put a price tag on a startup, especially one that's still in its early stages?
It's one of the most challenging aspects of starting a company.
Yeah, it feels very subjective.
It can feel that way, but the book does a good job of breaking down the different valuation methods that are commonly used.
Okay, so there's some science behind it?
There is. It's not just random numbers being thrown around.
So what are some of the factors that go into valuation?
Well, it's not just about how much revenue you're generating right now. It's about your growth potential, the size of the market you're targeting, the strength of your team, your competitive landscape.
So it's a combination of hard data and a bit of educated guesswork about the future.
Exactly. And they talk about different approaches like the scorecard method, where you compare your startup to similar companies,
Oh, interesting.
and the venture capital method, which factors in the investor's desired rate of return.
Okay, so there are actual frameworks and formulas.
There are, and they even provide examples and calculations so you can start to wrap your head around how it works.
That's super helpful. I always imagined it was just a bunch of people in a room throwing darts at a board.
It's a little more sophisticated than that.
That's reassuring to know. And they also talk about how this is an evolving field.
Oh, yeah. Valuation is constantly changing as new technologies and business models emerge.
So you got to stay on top of the latest trends.
Always.
Okay, so we've covered funding and valuation now for the topic that always feels a little strange to think about when you're just starting out: exit strategies.
I know, right? It can feel premature to be thinking about selling your company before you've even launched it.
Yeah. It's like planning for the end of the party before it's even begun.
But the book makes a really compelling case for why it's crucial to have an exit strategy in mind from the very beginning.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's about aligning your decisions with your ultimate goal. Every choice you make, from product development to hiring to fundraising, should be made with your exit strategy in mind.
So it's like having a North Star guiding your decisions.
Exactly. And it also helps you attract investors.
How so?
Well, investors want to see that there's a potential path to liquidity, a way for them to get a return on their investment.
So it's not just about building a cool company. It's about building a company that has a clear path to a successful outcome.
Whether that's going public or getting acquired.
Right, those are the two main exit routes.
Exactly. And the book walks you through both of them.
So the IPO, everyone dreams about the big public offering, ringing the bell on Wall Street.
It's the most glamorous option for sure.
But it's not for everyone.
Definitely not. The book emphasizes that it's incredibly complex, time-consuming, and only feasible for a small percentage of companies.
What about getting acquired?
That's much more common for startups.
Okay.
And they dedicate a whole chapter to it. They
Hmm.
cover everything from identifying potential acquirers to negotiating a deal to integrating your company into a larger organization.
Sounds complicated.
It can be, but it's often a great outcome for both the startup and the acquirer.
But selling a company you've poured your heart and soul into that can't be easy?
Absolutely, it's an emotional roller coaster.
Yeah. Letting go of your baby.
And the book acknowledges that it can be tough, especially for founders who are deeply passionate about their company.
But it's not always a sad ending, right?
Right. There are also potential rewards, financial freedom, the chance to start a new venture, the satisfaction of seeing your company thrive under new leadership.
So it can be a bittersweet moment.
It often is, but they end on a really inspiring note.
Okay, what's that?
They point out that 95% of successful founders go on to start new companies after an exit.
Wow, really?
Yeah, it shows that the entrepreneurial spirit never truly dies.
It's like a cycle of creation and innovation. You build something amazing, you let it go, and then you're on to the next big thing.
Exactly. And that's what makes the startup world so exciting.
Well, this whole deep dive has been incredibly insightful. I feel like the startup checklist has given us a roadmap, a toolkit, and a whole lot of inspiration.
It's a must-read for anyone who's even thinking about launching a startup.
Couldn't agree more. So to all our listeners out there who are feeling that entrepreneurial itch, we say go for it
Take the leap.
and take this book with you. It's your guide to navigating the exciting, challenging, and ultimately rewarding world of startups.
It's been a blast diving into this book with you.
Likewise, thanks for joining us, everyone, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive into the world of ideas and innovation.